everybody. Welcome to Findmypast from Home, the free family history series where you can all connect with each other, connect with us, and we can share incredible stories, because family history is just that. It is stories, incredible stories that make you who you are today, I suppose. And today is absolutely no exception. We are doing it in a slightly different format today. It's going to be more podcast style, so you can't see me and you can't see my special guest, but I'm hoping you will enjoy it all the same. Now, before I get into it, I need to introduce today's guest. Please, can I introduce Sally Herbert? Sally, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hi, Ellie, and thank you for inviting me here today. My name's Sally Herbert. I'm 59 years old and I live in Sussex, and I've written a book called The Missing Pieces of Mum.
Incredible. And I got a little bit of early access to this book, and let me tell you, everybody, it's a tearjerker. It's an incredible, incredible read. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. So Sally has published a book about her own personal family history journey to reunite her mum, Phyllis, with her long lost family. A quest I think will resonate with all of you listening at home. Now, I have a list of questions as long as my arm for Sally. So this is what we're going to be chatting about today. And if you would like to read the full story, if you are inspired, we do actually have 3 copies of Sally's book, The Missing Pieces of Mum, to give away today. Now, to enter this random prize draw, all you have to do is leave a comment on this live stream by 6 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, the 16th of November, 2021. And then what we'll do is we'll draw the random winners the following day, and I will fire your names over to Sally's publisher. So yes, that's where we're going to start today. How does that all sound, Sally?
Fantastic.
Great. Now, to set the scene, what I thought we would do is we do have a short book trailer for The Missing Pieces of Mum that I thought I would play. And then I'm going to read the book synopsis. So I'm just going to play the trailer now. And if that doesn't set the scene, I don't know what will, but I will just read the book's synopsis as well. Born out of wedlock in Dublin in 1937, Phyllis grew up in a tough church-run orphanage. She thought by fulfilling her dream to become a nurse in England, her life might change. But her loveless childhood predisposed a loveless marriage, and things began to spiral out of control for her and for her daughter, Sally. Looking for the answers to why both their lives went so spectacularly wrong led Sally to ask questions about the real identity of her mother. Who was she? Why was she abandoned? I need to find out these answers before it's too late. After a mission lasting nearly a decade of searching archives, contacting various organizations, charities, and anyone who would listen, Sally finally uncovered the truth. So, Sally, let's start off then. How did this book come about?
So the book's inception came about from the most incredible event that happened to me just over 6.5 years ago now, which was so dynamic given the backdrop of our family history that I felt compelled to tell the story of what became a life-changing experience. It all started in 2015 when I found my terminally ill mother's long-lost family through a DNA test. I was able to reunite her with her 2 brothers, Jim and Desmond, who she never knew existed. And that discovery came, as you've already said, at the end of an exhaustive 10-year search to find the truth out about her past.
That's just incredible. And what happened next then?
So this was it was the 10-year search was really started when I was looking for the details of who my mother's mother was. So my mother was Phyllis Little. She was born out of wedlock in Dublin in 1937 and started life in the mother and baby home called the Bethany after being abandoned by her mother. And then, aged 2.5, she was moved to a Protestant female orphanage where she remained until she was 16 years old. I mean, life was tough there. She was used, like many institutions in those days, as slave labour. The church-run orphanage's ethos was all about strict discipline, corporal punishment, and religious indoctrination. The children were also severely undermined and made to feel worthless, with a view that when they left the orphanage, the only thing that they'd be useful for was domestic service. All the time she was there, she longed to know who her mother was. But when she left at 16 and was handed her birth certificate for the first time, she thought she'd never find out the truth because the date of birth had been altered. And of course, this affected her both emotionally and psychologically because she felt that had been done deliberately to hide the truth about her mother and who she was and where she came from. I would say that her upbringing there and this deception, which she believed had occurred, had created a very insecure, vulnerable person, which in later life would contribute to her spiraling out, her life spiraling out of control. The events, which of course affected her, in turn affected myself and younger brother when we ended up in children's homes, one in England and one in Ireland when she left my father. So the book really is about my motivation to find the truth about her mother and her past life and what happened, because not only was her life affected, but mine also.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes there are answers to be found in the past. And what I found when I was reading the book is that for me, it felt very much like I was reading a novel at times. You interwove the recent past and the distant past really well. And did you feel you were able to capture more of the story by doing it that way?
I did. I wrote the missing pieces of Mum with the reader in mind, so they could actually visualise the whole story, like you would in a film, where there's flashbacks from the past as well as what's going on in the present. It was so they could understand my motivation for why I was so driven to find my mother's long-lost family.
Yeah, this is what I really, really loved about it. It wasn't just a narrative. It really brought it to life. And I really, really think I would have loved Phyllis, your mum, if we had ever had the chance to meet. She seems to have had such a zest for life and a courageous determination that I really, really admire. I really admire that in people. And now that you have written and published this book, her story, your story, now that's now preserved for all ages, for all time. How does that feel?
How does that feel? Wow, that's a big question. Phyllis, my mum, suffered many things in her life by not having loving parents or a stable environment. And then, unfortunately, a very unhappy and loveless marriage to my father, which was very detrimental to her health. Yet despite all of this, she was never bittered or twisted about the past and had an enormous capacity to forgive and be compassionate to her fellow man, which always, truly amazed me. She had also the most tenacious spirit you could ever imagine, a real zest for life that helped her fight back from severe illness many times and many trials and tribulations. My father, on the other hand, who'd also suffered a loveless childhood, brutal, really a brutal. I mean, the neighbours when he was growing up called the child protection people in the 1930s, because he was so physically abused by his father. But he was the complete and utter opposite. His motto was look after number one and don't care about anyone else. So this book discusses my mother's life, and as far as I'm concerned, is a vindication of all she suffered, and proof that although you may not have a good start in life, that doesn't mean to say you have to let it affect you forevermore. You may never forget what's happened to you and still bear the painful scars. I mean, I'm testament to that. But you can still be kind to others and treat people the way you wish to be treated yourself.
Truer words have never been spoken. It came across so much to me when reading the book, that both yourself and Phyllis, your mother, that's something you've both obviously had instilled in you, is that just because you had a rough start, it doesn't mean that you can't turn your life around a little bit. And not even in the sense of achievements, and I say achievements in sort of inverted commas, but being a good person, it goes an awful long way, and that it just comes across in the book so much. And
I'm glad about that.
Such an emotional read.
Oh, that's nice of you to say that. Thank you. That's nice.
And the book is almost not directly, but it's sort of split into two halves. So the first book takes us into Phyllis's childhood, your own childhood, which is what I said earlier about the recent past and the distant past sort of interweaving together. And then the second half goes into more detail about your recent research. And you did this with your mum's blessing, didn't you? And how did you go about finding your mum's family and your family, and why did you do this?
Yes, I mean, Mum was all for me trying to find out the truth about her life. I mean, all she ever wanted to know was who her mother was, and it caused her a lot of pain throughout her whole life. And I think being a vulnerable person, it really didn't help, But without practically no information to go on, when I first started searching in 2006. It was like an impossible dream. Several things had bugged me for years. Why Mum never knew nothing about her past, except that she was born illegitimate and her mother had left her in the Bethany home, which was on the birth certificate. So that's how she knew that. And why she didn't ask questions about the orphanage, especially with them changing the date on her birth certificate, which really, really upset her. The only thing we knew was that her mother's name was Margaret Little. The father's name was left blank. But the trouble was, because she was born in Ireland, it meant at the time in 2006, when I first started looking, either contacting an Irish genealogist or trawling through the archive offices in Ireland itself, which meant flying over there because I live in the UK. Because at the time there weren't actually any Irish records on any of the ancestry sites, as far as I'm aware anyway. So after consulting Google, I found an address of a charity in Dublin, and they held the records of the Bethany home. So I followed the procedure, filled in a consent form that, on behalf of Mum. So I had her permission to talk to them, and I spoke to a social worker. And to my amazement, she was able to give me some crucial information relating to Margaret Little, my mother's mother. However, despite the charity providing 2 addresses where Margaret, she was also known as Peggy, had stayed, and using their own genealogists in Ireland, they couldn't find any birth, death, marriage, or baptismal certificate for Margaret / Peggy Little. And this was to be the case for the next several years. despite me contacting numerous organisations, historians, family history centres, councils, charities, applying under the Freedom of Information Act twice, making a road trip to Ireland with my friend Libby. I literally did everything I possibly could, and this went on for nearly 10 years, and I got nowhere. And that was not until the 11th hour, when after all else had failed, I did a DNA test on Mum, and then eureka.
Amazing. And I think it's just a testament that family history research and genetic DNA testing, that it's come along leaps and bounds in the past decade or so. And without that crucial last piece of the puzzle, the DNA results, it just doesn't bear thinking. But anyway, obviously I've read the book, so I know what happens next. And I'm trying not to give too much away for anybody watching, because I want them to go read it as well. How did it feel when the messages first started coming in from DNA matches? And then, it goes on, the book talks about the fact that, you were sent a photo of your grandmother and you saw that for the first time. And, this was the first time you'd had contact with these relatives. I was very moved reading that. And suddenly you and your mum went from having no family to having siblings and cousins. How on earth did you process all of that?
Well, you can imagine. I mean, if you've ever watched any of these long lost family programs, and they make you cry, they really get you, don't they? I was living that. It happened to me. I couldn't believe it at first, and then it hit me with a bang. It was the most wonderful, euphoric experience ever. My wildest dream had come true. I mean, I've been praying like mad for this for years. It was like winning the biggest lottery you could ever wish to imagine. Because not only was it about, finding my mother's mother and to give my mum the news that she wanted so desperately to hear, but I'd grown up with no family, because obviously my mother was an orphan, and so there was no family on that side. But on my father's side, although we did have some relatives, he had a brother and some cousins. I had some cousins, rather. I didn't even know them, because my father had fallen out with the family many, many years before. And so they were like strangers to us. We didn't know them at all. I knew of their existence, but hadn't grown up with my cousins. I didn't know any of them. So, it was like I was an orphan as well, and my brother. We didn't know who our family was on either side. We had no family, and our family unit was always just myself, my brother, my mum, and my dad, and that was our entire family. So this was an amazing, amazing thing that happened to us. And of course, my mother, always believing that she was completely alone in the world, she now had enough cousins to sink a battleship. Never mind, she had, 3 brothers and an aunt in Australia, who was Peggy's only surviving sibling. But we are welcomed into this family to discover that she actually had about 60 first cousins, never mind second, third cousins. And this was all because of a man called Matthew. He's my second cousin, and his DNA matched my mother's. So he would be her first cousin once removed. And Matthew is a fantastic person. Without him, I think, well, we wouldn't know the past. We wouldn't know this huge family, the Littles and the Armstrongs. It's all down to him. And because as you said earlier, that was when I first saw my grandmother, Peggy, for the first time. And there was a picture of her in black and white as a 10-year-old girl. And I just stared at it and I thought, wow, that's my grandmother. Wow, this is my mother's mother. And I kept looking at it thinking, well, she does look like my mother. My mother was more Mediterranean looking, and Peggy looked sort of fair and, had a different sort of face. But even so, it's an amazing thing to see someone, you've never known your whole life. Yeah, phenomenal.
I know something of what that is like, though nothing near on this scale. So anybody who is a regular viewer of Findmypast from Home will know that I talk about my paternal grandfather quite a lot. He died when my dad was only 2 years old, and I only know him through photographs. And there have just seeing him stare back at you from a photograph for the first time, that you can't put that into words, I don't think. So I can somewhat empathize with what you must have been feeling. And of course, Matthew, I believe, was the first person, the first relative you made contact with as well. And what really strikes me, and what struck me while I was reading the book, was that this story, although it is yours and it's your mum's, it goes beyond that. It's Matthew's story, it's Jim's story, it's Desmond's story. And everybody watching or listening, you need to go and read the book to get all of the details. I'm not going to go into all of them right now. But in addition to that, there's another layer to it. There's another story of fallen women. And I say fallen women in inverted commas again, and children who grew up in homes and orphanages like the Bethany home. This story is bigger. And surely it must be bigger than you could have expected.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it started with Matthew, and we chatted on the phone, and that he was the one to break the news to me that that my mother actually had siblings. I had absolutely no idea that. I mean, I gathered from when I looked at his public family tree that Peggy, my mother's mother, my grandmother, that she had passed away quite young. But I didn't really know the rest of the story. And gradually, as we're talking on the telephone, things started to unfold. So I discovered that not only was my mother born illegitimate, but so was another child called Jim. Jim was born in 1938, so it turned out there was about 18 months between them. And then Peggy, for whatever reason, she gave both my mother and Jim away. My mother went back to the Bethany home, and Jim was fostered out. And then, indeed, she did marry James Clancy, and she went on to have 3 more children. So this story, yes, The Missing Pieces of Mum, this book is not just about my mother's story, but it's about the rest of the long lost family. It's it's a voyage of discovery about other family members' lives and how the past and not knowing who they were had affected them also. It seems that Mum and her siblings were separated, were separated by secrets and lies from their parents, which were kept from them for a lifetime until they actually met. So, 70, nearly 80 years, which is quite incredible. And they lived in different countries. So Jim, the illegitimate brother, he was fostered out very happily to a foster family, went on to have a great life, happy with his siblings and his foster parents. Desmond, on the other hand, who was the youngest, and tragically, so Peggy died 2 months after he was born, so he never knew her also. His father later on took him and his older brother, and they were both born within the marriage, to Canada, but his father never told him or his brother about their mother or their grandparents in Ireland or any of their relatives. So this coming together at the end of my mother's life, meeting her brothers for the first time, with each of them were discovering their own stories which they had to tell, which was amazing, And the other thing, of course, was that Matthew and Jim's son Kieran, they had also been looking for, members of this Clancy family. So they didn't know about Matthew didn't know about my mother, and he didn't know about Jim. They were obviously discovered, but he knew about the children that had been born within the marriage. So he was looking. And Kieran, obviously, he was the son of Jim, who was born illegitimately. He didn't know about the mother either. And initially, he didn't know about Matthew, the rest of the family. So there was one point in the book in 2013 where we're all nearly coming together, but don't quite make it. And none of us know. We're all searching for each other at the same time, which I find quite fascinating. So there's that aspect of the story, the different lives that Mum and her siblings had. And as for the Bethany home, well, as I started to delve into the archives and look at the internet for information, when I was researching, for the Missing Pieces Mum, I was shocked to discover that Mum was actually lucky to survive in that mother and baby home, the Bethany home, because it was reported in newspapers that many children were left in filthy conditions and were severely neglected. Many died of childhood diseases that would be curable today, and also, tragically, of malnutrition. And we only know this because they found over 200 bodies buried in Mount Jerome in Dublin. Campaigner Derek Glinster of the Bethany Home Survivors Group is still, to this day, fighting the Irish government for redress.
It just doesn't bear thinking about any of that, really, but it happened. And it's why I'm so grateful to people like you, Sally, for telling the story, because sometimes the past is not a very rosy place. Bad things did happen, but the only way that we're not going to repeat these awful mistakes is if we tell the stories and we learn from them. Putting things in a box and ignoring them, that's not going to help anybody, in my opinion. And I hope you don't mind me maybe spoiling this tiny little bit of the book. I say tiny, it was a huge moment for me when I read this, but the moment or the time when your mum was able to meet her siblings for the first time, tragically just before she passed away. I'm tearing up now just even speaking about it, and this didn't even happen to me.
Oh, yeah. It was a very emotional moment when they actually met, because poor Mum was in the last throes of life. So Desmond had only discovered Jim the year before, in 2014, and they hadn't met. They'd emailed and spoken on the telephone. So 2015, he had decided to come over from Canada and spend 3 weeks with Jim, which just coincided by coincidence. There were so many coincidences that it was a year that, when I did the DNA test, that I found Mum's family. So once we had all made contact, I arranged for Desmond and Jim, who were, in Ireland together anyway, for the first time, to come and meet their sister for the first time. And they did. They flew over, and it was the 23rd of June 2015. I'll always remember it. The sky was a brilliant blue, and it was a lovely day. And they were late getting here. There'd been a problem trying to find where we lived, but eventually they made it. And we all went to this restaurant, which was adjacent to the nursing home. And, they held hands and they hugged, and they talked to each other for the first and what was to be the last time in their lives, because unbeknown to us at the time, Jim was seriously ill as well. And a week later, he was diagnosed with the same condition as my mum. And unfortunately, the following year, he died as well. So this was a very, very small window in time for all of them, which was never to be repeated, tragically, because in the same year, in the October of 2015, my mother passed away as well. So very sad.
I'm just so pleased they got to meet, separated by, as you say, secrets and lies, and I say scandal. Scandal's the wrong word, really. But I'm so pleased they got to meet. And before we move on, actually, because I do have just a few more questions for you, if that's okay, Sally. I wondered whether you might be able to tell our lovely viewers a little bit about the photograph that you've uploaded as your little avatar today.
Okay, so my mother's maiden name was Little, and she loved that name. She was quite proud of it, but because she never knew where it came from. And the picture that you can see there is of the Little family. So it was taken about 1913. I believe there were about 13 in that family. And this is all courtesy of Matthew, thankfully. And so this was Peggy's mother's side of the family. So in that picture, there's a woman standing up holding a baby, and that is Mary May Little. So that is my mother's grandmother in that picture. So they would be my great grandparents in that picture. And the man sitting down with the moustache and the two children in front of him, that's Richard Little. And next to him is his wife, Agnes Little. So that couple with the baby on her lap, they're my great grandparents. And the lady behind holding the baby is my great grandmother, my mother's grandmother. So that's a very, very unique picture there. And that's the Little family that, of course, my mother knew nothing about whatsoever until the end of her life.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot today, and for anybody watching and listening, it's not even the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more. So if we have inspired anybody to pick up the book, it's not an easy read, as I'm sure you have gathered from what we've discussed. In terms of the subject matter, it's very emotional and there's a lot happening. But what, for me, amongst the heartache and the pain, what really shone through for me was just how much you loved your mum and just how brave and determined she was and you still are. And actually, the first time I read the line, "Where there's life, there's hope," I sobbed. I properly sobbed.
Oh, really?
And that was your mum's mantra, wasn't it?
Oh, God, she was the most positive person I've ever met in my life. Honestly, to think of all that she suffered in her life in the orphanage and then in her marriage and the various other things that happened throughout the years. I mean, I am not a glass half full sort of person like she was. However, I was certainly inspired by her determined spirit not to give up in life when all else fails. I mean, she used to often say to me as well, as one door closes, another one opens. And you know what? She was right.
Yeah. I believe both of those. This is why I think I would have liked your mum so much. I think we're actually quite similar in sense that
gosh.
always looking for that positive spin on a bad situation, if that makes sense. So a lot of people listening to us today will either be interested in family history or have already done their family tree, but there might also be people who are struggling for answers themselves. I wondered, do you have any advice for them?
Well, yeah, I do. And my advice, first of all, would be, as you can see in this case, is no matter how hard it gets. Um, and you're bound to struggle at times, because I certainly did. I mean, I was at it for 10 years. If you come up against a brick wall and you don't think that you can go any further, be positive. Think outside the box. Reach out to other members who may be able to help you. And I've done that many, many times before finding this family and since. Um, it really does help you if you belong to an ancestry website and you're able to have a match, a DNA match, or someone else got a family tree with members of your family in there, but you don't have much information yourself. Email them, ask them, reach out. Don't be frightened. They can only say no or ignore you, which sometimes they do. But then on the same, at the same time, you can find people that are really, really helpful, and I have done many times. So that's the first thing I would say. And then contact, obviously, if you're in a situation like I was with an illegitimate child, which is quite a tricky one and nothing to go on, contact charities like Barnardo's, the Salvation Army. Just Google, what you think and see what comes up on, Google's a wonderful tool for investigating long lost families, I can tell you. Then when you're on our ancestry website, look for the actual birth, death, and marriage certificates. I mean, sometimes you can find these free online and others you can't, so I would order them, because when you look at the actual record itself, it's a minefield of information. Quite often you'll have an address, name of father, occupation, and things like that, and it really does help you. Don't just copy other people's tree and think that's enough. Because quite often, and I've even done this, you'll find that their information is not accurate. They might guess something and think, oh, that's my relative. And then you find you come unstuck and you can't go any further because you've got the wrong information. So, it does pay. And then I would also say, and this is where you can bring your family history to life. And I have found this myself, and it is amazing, honestly, the things you can find out. Search the newspaper archives. They'll give you a wealth of information to bring your family history to life. So I'll give you an example. One of my great granduncles, this is on my dad's side, I got his death certificate. I had ordered it and it came in the post. He died of self-inflicted poisoning. He'd drunk a bottle of salts of spirits, or spirits of salts.
Oh, gosh.
Like drinking acid, really. It was used as a cleaning fluid for furniture, like furniture polish and that, back in the day. And this was about 1923. And so his death certificate said self-inflicted poison, and I thought, that's odd. And it mentioned a coroner's report. So I knew if there was a coroner's report, there had to be an article in the newspaper. And sure enough, there was. I mean, in those days, newspaper articles were so different to how they are now. So now you get, you'll read a passage in online or whatever, and they repeat it about 2 paragraphs down, and you think, I've just read that. But in those days, it was more like a police statement. So you got everything, what happened on the night, who said what, all the precise details, even down as far as what undertakers they use. I mean, it's quite amazing. So I really was able to bring that story to life. And then when I was searching for information on James Clancy, the person that Peggy married, I delved into the Findmypast newspaper archives, and to my amazement discovered that his grandfather, he had been a witness to a police detective's murder at the Royal Exchange in Dublin in 1892. Imagine that. This was a British newspaper, because at the time, obviously, it was Britain ruling all of Ireland then. And it had everything. It had a full inquest, witness statements, even a diagram of where the incident happened, which really was a fascinating insight into the past. And I even went to, I've got a friend, an elderly friend who's into history in Dublin, and he took me to the spot of the Royal Exchange where this murder happened. So it was, there was a police station there, and this poor fellow was blown up basically. And on the opposite side of the police station was where James Clancy, they're all called James Clancy, but so this was James Clancy Senior, who would have been James Clancy, Peggy's husband's grandfather. Mm-hmm. He was a witness, and his witness statement was actually in the archives. And I thought, wow. And then to sort of actually go there to Ireland and stand on the spot where it all happened was, that is what you're talking about, bringing history to life, and I love that. I mean, because I have a vivid imagination anyway, but that's just crazy.
Yeah, there really is something to reading the words of your ancestor and standing where they would have stood. There's something quite special about that, even if it's witnessing something like that. But you're already saying and talking about what you're working on now. So what I would like to know, what I'm sure everybody listening would like to know, is where is your journey taking you next? We've got the 1921 census for England and Wales coming out in January on Findmypast. Will that unlock some answers for you, for example?
Well, Ellie, like a lot of my relatives, because there's lots in the Armstrong family, particularly, that I just love genealogy. I mean, there's about 20 people that have done DNA tests in that family, and of course, we love it all. We're so interested in it. We're really looking forward to the 1921 census for England and Wales. I did some more research, and I discovered that Peggy, it seems, before she had my mother, was working as a domestic servant in a stately home called Kenure Park House in Rush, County Dublin. That's on the North Dublin coast. And that's where she got pregnant with my mother, which is, very interesting. I only found that out last year, in fact, when we were in lockdown. And the owner of that place, he also owned Saffron Park in Wales. I think it might be a National Trust place now. I'm not quite sure. But because this covers Wales as well as England, I'll be really interested to find out about his family and, his life in 1921. And of course, on my father's side, there's more family mysteries there. So I can't wait, to be honest. I absolutely can't wait for the 1921 census to come out. And I know, as I say, lots of my other family members feel the same.
Yeah, it's going to open doors left, right, and centre, not just for you, but for me, and hopefully for countless other people as well. I'm very, very excited also, and you're going to have to, if that's okay with you, keep me in the loop as to what you find, because I am invested now. I need to know what happens.
Well, yeah, so it's an ongoing story, I think you'll find.
All the best ones are.
Yeah.
Now, Sally, those were all of my questions. Was there anything else, and forgive me if I'm putting you on the spot here, before I wrap up and say goodbye to everybody listening today, is there anything else you would like to share?
Watch this space, because I did find out more information last year. It's still ongoing, the research for that, but I'm sure there will be more things that will come to light in the next year or so. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, fantastic. So I think that brings us nicely to a close. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today for this very, very special and poignant interview. I think you will agree. Sally, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your story. And for me, it probably, your story is a lot of things to you, I'm sure, but for me, your story really highlights that very special power of family history. And it's why we do it. We don't research our family trees just so we can look at all of these names on a tree. We want to know the stories behind those names. We want to tell these forgotten stories, and we just yearning for connection, all of us. And I think that really came out in the book. And I really enjoyed reading it. I think I read it over the course of about 2 days, and we have only touched on I'm a fast reader. We've only touched on a small portion of the book today. There is just so much more to discover. So everybody listening, you can buy the book now. It is available to buy. And remember, if you want to be in with a chance of winning one of 3 copies of The Missing Pieces of Mum, be sure to leave a comment on this stream by 6 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, the 16th of November. And I will draw the winners the day after, which will be Wednesday, the 17th. Be sure to share this stream as well. And I would really like to know from all of you listening, do you like this podcast style? Should we do more like this? And a little bit more housekeeping from me, a reminder of what's coming up later on this week. Mary McKee is due to give a session on Wednesday on the contemporary reaction to the 1921 census. However, I should note that she's currently feeling a little under the weather. She messaged me this morning saying she wasn't feeling well at all. She's actually out sick today. We might need to postpone that one, but I will ensure that I update you all in any case. And then Alex will be back on Friday for Friday's Live. So I think that brings us very, very nicely to an end. Would you like to say goodbye, Sally, to our lovely community?
I would, and I hope you've enjoyed this podcast as I have, and thank you, Ellie, for having me here today. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
It's been a privilege and an utter delight to have you. You're a natural born storyteller, and I hope your story reaches far and wide and resonates with people the way it's resonated.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Tune in again, and take care. Bye-bye.